Let's talk some chess. This game was played via stream in 2020. The player with the black pieces is Magnus Carlsen, who we all know. The player with the white pieces is Luis Supi, who is a Brazilian grandmaster. And this game had a moment in it that Magnus just had to shake his head in disbelief. So I think if it's good enough for Magnus to stare at in awe, it's good enough for us. So Supi opens up with e4. We have d5 by Magnus. He captures on d5, and queen captures on d5. Very standard stuff in the start. We have knight to f3 by Supi. Bishop immediately to g4 by Magnus, pinning the knight to the queen, and obviously getting a piece developed. And now two pieces are attacking this knight, which is properly defended for the moment, but maybe something you need to be concerned about. And Supi just eliminates any tension by putting the bishop on e2, developing a piece, breaking the pin, and adding a defender to this knight on f3. We have knight to c6 by Magnus, knight to c3 by Supi. This comes with an attack on the queen on d5. So the queen retreats to d7. And we have h3, forcing this light-squared bishop to make a decision. Do you retreat on the h-file? Do you retreat into the center of the board? Or do you capture the knight? And here, Magnus decides to capture on f3. We have bishop captures on f3, Magnus castles kingside. I'm sorry, Magnus castles queenside, and Supi castles kingside. And now you have sort of a fun classic position where the kings are castled on opposite sides of the board, and both sides are going to try to attack and push forward and get the enemy king before his own king can be gotten. So sort of a fun position to continue attacking here. Magnus starts off with knight to d4, and this is a nice square for the knight to sit on. It attacks the bishop on f3, which is quite a powerful minor piece. It reaches effortlessly into Magnus's camp here. You're also threatening the c2 pawn, so now if the queen tries to develop or move to the e-file, the knight can take this pawn. And probably the best thing is that this knight cannot be easily kicked, so you don't have c3 with the pawn in this position because the knight is, of course, blocking the pawn from moving. So overall, a nice, frustrating square for the knight to be on, at least for the player with white pieces. Supi here ignores it and plays a4, so now, as we talked about, trying to, now that Supi didn't castle kingside, so his king is not on c1, which means he can just push these pawns recklessly without worrying about the defense of his own king, and similarly, Magnus can push his kingside pawns if he so chooses, so that's sort of what leads to these exciting dynamics and back and forths when you have games where players castle on opposite sides of the board. So a4 is played, and Magnus plays a very common prophylactic move when you castle kingside, just putting the king on b8, and now you have these three pawns very squarely in front of the king, just like you would have if you castled kingside. So always a nice move to throw in when you castle kingside. And now knight to b5 by Supi, just doubling up, well, sorry, not yet, soon to be doubling up on this c7 pawn. But this is an interesting move because it's the knight can very easily be kicked by a6 or c6, but Supi's going to put it here for now and maybe force Magnus to move his pawns and disrupt his king's defense. So we'll see sort of how that goes. For the moment, Magnus just takes away the bishop on f3. So, wasn't liking the look of this bishop and knight, even though they're not teaming up on the same squares. Wasn't liking this really powerful minor piece. So he takes the bishop with check. The queen takes back. And now, instead, on this diagonal, there's a queen, which also isn't great for Magnus. But Magnus just plays a6 with the idea of kicking the knight away and sort of regaining a solid defensive structure. Here, though, Supi actually plays the first kind of exciting move of the game and just ignores the pawn attacking his knight and plays c4. So this is clearly a knight sacrifice. The knight has not moved and can be taken by the pawn. So let's see sort of what happens if this sacrifice is accepted. If Magnus takes with the pawn on b5, then Supi would take with the pawn on a4, thus opening up the a file for the attack of the rook. And Magnus ultimately did not go for this. Instead, in this position, he actually just played e5, developing in the center and opening up a path for his dark squared bishop, because Magnus was sort of afraid of opening up this a file, at least I assume. It is a blitz game. He didn't have time to think about how these lines would work out. But this is actually totally fine for Magnus. So after this a takes on b5, Magnus has queen to d3, offering a queen trade, trying to slow down the attack, trade down pieces, because Magnus is now up a knight. Supi obviously would decline and bring the queen to f7, but here even e6, giving away the e6 pawn so the dark square bishop can develop. Queen takes the pawn, and now the dark square bishop comes to c5, and now Magnus all of a sudden is countering on his own accord. So he's down a couple of pawns now. I think he's down 3 pawns, but he has a knight, an extra piece, and going to make the most of that. And this bishop is going to have a very difficult time getting out because the pawn on d2 cannot move because there's a queen on d3. So here, kind of a fun little line. Supi could play b4. This comes as an attack on the bishop. But here, even Magnus can ignore this pawn attacking the bishop and play knight to h6. And maybe this was the move that Magnus didn't see when he was looking. We have no idea, no way to know. But maybe he didn't see this this move. The idea behind this is you cannot accept the bishop sacrifice. So if Supi takes the bishop, then you play rook h to e8, and now the queen is actually trapped. The rook is attacking the queen. This rook is cutting off the d-file, and incredibly, all of these squares, so the f5 square is taken away by the black queen, the g4 square is taken away by the knight, and all of the squares on the 6th rank are either taken away by pawns, by a rook, more pawns, and then even, this f7 square is taken away by the knight. So even on a very open board where the queen is on e6, in this position, the queen would be trapped, and Magnus would be totally fine here. So all that to say is that after you get this knight sacrifice by just playing the pawn, ignoring the hanging knight on b5, you can capture this knight, and it's totally fine. But Magnus decided to play it safe for the moment and play e5 here. But this allows Supi to play d4, continuing to sack his knight on b5, and Magnus continues to ignore it. He has e takes on d4, so now he has this, this nice passed pawn on d4. He has a rook and a queen behind it, but now Supi can develop the dark square bishop. So that's sort of the trade-off, and that's exactly what Supi does. He plays bishop to f4, and now you have the knight and the bishop lining up on this c7 square, which is starting to look a little bit scary for Magnus's king. Here, Magnus finally accepts the knight sacrifice. Wait, did I? Yeah, I should have said. This was kind of the critical position for Magnus. This e takes on d4 looks like a very reasonable move because we talked about the passed pawn, but the fact that it allows this bishop to develop to f4 in such a threatening way, in this position, this is a totally winning position for the player with the white pieces. So this was kind of the crucial, I should have mentioned, this was kind of the crucial moment of the game. Magnus can't capture this pawn. Instead here you want to play knight to e7, developing your pieces, not letting the bishop develop to f4, because that's sort of the Supi's crucial move in this position. Then maybe d5 is played, but again, you still don't have this bishop to f4 move. By capturing the pawn on d4, now you allow bishop to f4, and now this is big trouble, and now Magnus sort of sees the position starting to fall apart. The correct defense here is putting the rook on c8 and just hankering down and defending this this pawn. Again, you have the queen, you have the knight, you have the bishop, you have the rook, you have the pawns. It's going to be tough to withstand this attack, but this is the most robust way to withstand it. Instead, Magnus says, you know what, I should have captured this knight before. I'm going to capture it now, and plays a captures on b5, but this leads to total disaster. Again, the same idea. Supi opens up the a file with b captures on a5, and now you have the rook has an open access to Magnus's king. The bishop and the queen are both attacking these pawns, and this is very harrowing for Magnus. So we get bishop to d6, challenging this dark square bishop, but it's too late because you have this wonderful, subtle little rook lift, rook to a2. Supi prepares to double the rooks on the a file, and after queen to e5. This I'm not really sure what this move achieves. Magnus probably just trying for tricks or anything at this point. I guess the idea is that you have a double attack on this dark square bishop, so maybe Supi doesn't want to lose that, but Supi doesn't care about the bishop at the moment. He just plays rook to a1, doubling up the rooks, and now threatening checkmate on a8. So if Magnus makes a silly move here, ignores this threat, or even just captures the bishop, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I don't want to give anything away, so I'm going to go back. Okay, even if Magnus just captures this bishop here, offering a queen trade, then you get rook to a8, and this is checkmate. The rook is protecting the rook. The king has nowhere to go, so the game is over. So Magnus has to deal with this threat, and he tries to deal with it with king to c8, trying to run away with the king and run to safer grounds, get away to the king side. But here is where Supi just played the move that stunned Magnus. I think Magnus did like the thing where you snap your fingers a little bit. I'll link the video below so you can see it. I've never been able to do it, but you know what I'm talking about, where you like shake your fingers and they snap. So yeah, see if you can find this move. It's kind of tricky because Magnus's king looks very close to being able to escape. Supi's bishop is attacked twice, and you know, if you move the bishop, then queen takes queen, and then the pawns are doubled, and that's no good. This pawn is threatening to march onward, so it's kind of tough to find the right move here, but there is a move that leads to just an incredible endgame, so see if you can find it while I give you a couple seconds. Okay, the move is the stupendous queen to c6, and this was the move. It took Magnus like a second to be like, oh my god, that's amazing, and he resigned the game and just congratulated Supi on just an incredible move. This is an 18-move game, which very rare to checkmate Magnus in 18 moves, so it's an incredible achievement. But it doesn't look like an incredible achievement because the queen is sitting on e6, where it can be captured by the pawn on b7. So that, you know, this is clearly a queen sacrifice. The purpose of this move is to cut off the d7 square. So, of course, whenever you make a crazy move like this, there has to be a threat implicit behind it. If Supi here if Magnus plays a silly move like h6, then you get rook to a8, and now this is checkmate because the king cannot escape to d7 because the queen is guarding it. So that's the threat, of course. But it seems very easy to deal with that threat by just capturing the queen on c6. But then this doesn't work because the pawn on b5 replaces the queen on c6. And in this case, the pawn is just as good as the queen because the pawn cuts off the d7 square and the recently vacated b7 square, and that's all that you need to do. That's all that the queen was doing on c6, so it's totally fine for the pawn to replace it. So here, the king can't escape, and any move that you make is going to lead to checkmate. You can delay it a bit. You can play queen to b1 check, forcing the rook to capture, so rook captures, and now blocking with the bishop, rook captures again. And now even if you try to run away with the king on b8, or not even run away, but guard the a8 square, Supi just doubles up his rooks again on the a file, and then no matter what you play, checkmate is coming on a8 because the pawn blocks this b7 square. So it's kind of frustrating because you can make a bunch of moves and block and move the king around, but there's just no real escape because there's no way that the king can run away to the king side. The d7 square is cut off. Can't run up the board because b7 is cut off, and the game is over. You know, again, block with the bishop doesn't work. Queen check doesn't work, is what we just saw. So just an incredible, sort of frustrating position for Magnus, but obviously he appreciates how amazing a move it was. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Not very often that you see this happen to Magnus, so it's very notable. I'll link the original video down below. But thanks for watching. Please drop a like, drop a subscribe. Let me know of any other games you'd like me to review, and we'll see you next time.